And we're all set, Suzanne.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today for our webinar with the K-12 stakeholder focus on the Texas Success Initiative and the TSI Assessment version 2.0. My name is Suzanne Morales-Vail. I'm the Director of Statewide Developmental Education and Adult Education, and I am co-presenting with my colleague, Assistant Director Keelan Morgan. And thank you again for joining us. So we're gonna get ready to start. Our agenda today, next slide, Keelan. We're gonna focus on providing some specific updates to the Texas Success Initiative. And for those of you who may not be familiar, that is the actual statute which requires that all entering undergraduates have to be assessed for readiness in reading, writing, and math prior to their enrollment in college level coursework. And there are a number of exemptions. And of course, when we talk about undergraduates, we're also talking about eligibility for dual credit courses. The specific assessment for that purpose is called the Texas Success Initiative Assessment. The current version is TSIA, and most of what we're going to be talking about today will also include the upgraded version 2.0, which is slated to launch on January 11th. We're also going to be talking about testing and placement options during the COVID era. And then Keelan will spend some time and specifically unpack TSI version 2.0, including the timeline, enhancements, specific information about specifications, the recently approved college readiness benchmarks, and any additional information. And as usual, we'll have some time in the end to address some specific questions. We also ask you that you do go ahead and submit your questions in the chat. Some of them we'll be able to answer as we're going along, but most of them we'll probably have to save towards the end when we have this Q&A time. Next slide. So we wanted to remind everyone that we recently had a board meeting on October 22nd, and that at that meeting, 3 main items related to developmental education and the TSI were approved. First of all, the college readiness benchmarks for the TSIA 2.0 were approved. Also, for specific types of placements for undergraduate students, scaling to co-requisite models to 100% of those students assessed at diagnostic level 5 for math and levels 5 and 6 for ELAR. Next slide. And the third thing that was approved is also related to, there you go. The third thing that was approved at the board meeting is also related to TSI Rule 4.56, which specifically states that the TSIA is the board approved assessment in Texas for the purpose of assessing college readiness, and that the TSIA 2.0 will replace the TSIA on January 11th. It also clarifies that since the score range is the only thing that really is the major thing that's changed in terms of score on the score report. So the current score range is 310 to 390. The score range for TSIA 2.0 will change to 910 to 990. And that's mostly for the purpose of differentiating among the two assessments. But the diagnostic levels, the levels of 1 to 6 do not change, and that component remains the same. And then therefore, all the exemptions outlined in TSI Rule 4.62 with regard to co-requisite models, so specifically with regard to co-requisite models, those exemptions do not change and also remain applicable for TSIA 2.0. And that basically, in a nutshell, says students who are assessed at levels 1 to 4 are exempt from the requirements of co-requisite. Next slide. So some of the testing options during the COVID waiver. Since March, Commissioner Keller, Commissioner of Higher Education, Harrison Keller, did approve a number of waivers that related to TSI. Before I get to those waivers, I also wanted to talk about the testing requirements. So normally the TSIA is administered in in-person format. We worked very closely with our colleagues at the College Board. The College Board is the test vendor for the TSIA. And by the way, our colleague Kathy Montanesi is also on this call, and she is our main liaison that we work very closely with regard to the current version and the upgraded, the development and implementation of the upgraded version. So they worked very hard, and we have two main options available for virtual remote proctoring, which allows students to take the test from their home computer or any other appropriate online setting. The first one is through the TSIA testing service. And here the remote proctors are actually provided by the testing service. And we just want to remind everyone that the human monitor proctoring option through TSIA is the only one that is allowable for the TSIA. There are additional options through TSIA that are automated, run through AI versions, and we just want to remind everyone that those are not available for TSIA test administrations. Furthermore, we also have worked with College Board closely so that video chat web services such as WebEx, GoToMeeting, Zoom, the platform in which we find ourselves right now, that those are also available for remote online proctoring. And in this case, the testing administrator or the school district or the institution of higher ed provides the actual trained proctors for this purpose. Next slide. And here it's just as a reminder, the most important thing when we expanded TSIA test administration and TSIA2 test administration for remote online proctoring, we still, our most important factor is we have to still ensure the validity, reliability, and security of those tests. And so here you can see, I'm not going to read them, but here are the, in addition to some other security related factors, here are the main components that the test administrator still had to ensure with regard to remote proctoring, including for video chat web services. Next slide. So specifically, I mentioned earlier about the waivers that were approved by Commissioner Keller since March. And this is for both undergraduate students, so those who are high school complete, who are getting ready to enter community college or a four-year university in Texas, or for those high school students who are looking at eligibility for dual credit enrollment. These waivers were approved for summer 2020, for fall 2020, which is the fall in which we find ourselves now, for next spring 2021, and also for summer 2021 enrollments. So there are three main options, and I'll talk a little bit more about which additional factors that are now allowed through this waiver. But the three main options also recommend that institutions consider other factors to help them determine which option is the best one for each individual student. So the first option is to go ahead and enroll the student with an unknown TSI status in a co-requisite model. And that is a model whereby the student is actually able to enroll in the college level course, but also has to co-enroll in a support class, in a developmental education support class or intervention. We do want to remind everyone, though, that institutions of higher ed, when they submit for formula funding for course reimbursement, that the developmental education portion of that co-requisite model is not available for institutions to submit for funding reimbursement for high school students. Next slide, please. Option two, we currently have a rule in place, and this was even pre-COVID, and it was originally designed for some of those one-off unusual circumstances where a student might, international student is one example that comes to mind, might have showed up at the institution's doorstep the day of or the day before classes start. So this provision was allowed for an exceptional circumstance for the student who had no access to TSIA testing. Commissioner Keller expanded this exceptional circumstance to also include the COVID environment where a student may not have access to TSIA testing. And under those circumstances, the student is able to enroll directly in the freshman level academic college level course without assessment. The provision that's really important though with this rule is the student should still be assessed by the end of that semester in which the student was placed in the college level course. We do tell institutions there is one provision where the assessment testing is not required, and that is if you the student's advisor checks with the student's faculty member. This is the great time right now during this time period before the end of the semester. And they both agree that the student has a very good likelihood of passing the course with an A, B, or C. And if that's the case, and the student still has some difficulty assessing or getting access to the test, the student does not need to be assessed. However, at this point in time during the semester, if it looks like the student is really struggling or is likely not to pass that college level course, those students should be prioritized to ensure that they are assessed on the TSIA before the end of the semester. Next slide. And finally, the third option is for a student who is non-degree or non-certificate seeking. This is already in place in Rule 4.54b, where we have our exemptions to TSI. And we just want to say that if a student is non-degree or non-certificate seeking, they can also be placed directly in the college level course. And that, of course, is the student with the unknown status. The only exception to this one would be for the higher ed side. So those for high school complete students. Most of those students are using some sort of federal financial aid, Pell Grants, student loans, to help offset the cost of attending those classes. And then they have to be aware that for undergraduate students who are designated as non-degree seeking, they would not be able to use their federal financial aid because federal financial aid requires that students be degree or certificate seeking in order to use those funds. And of course, in all cases, institutions have to be sure that their policies, whatever those policies are with regard to the COVID waivers, do still align with and are consistent with current SACS COC standards and policy. Next slide. So when institutions determine which of those three options are best, is a co-requisite model best for an individual student, direct placement, either through the exceptional clause or because the student is non-degree or non-certificate seeking. Of course, the most important thing is you don't want to have one policy apply to all students. So we definitely say one size fits all is not the best choice. So which of these three would be the best? Well, there are a number of other additional indicators, also known, we also refer to these as multiple measures that the institution can also consider. One of them, of course, is the student intent. Is the student non-degree seeking? Is the student in high school? Then that might be the option for the student. Looking at high school GPA, course taking patterns, looking at the level of math that the student has completed, whether they have any experience with pre-AP, AP, or IB coursework. And of course, those all important non-cognitive factors. Level of motivation, self-efficacy, does the student work? Does the student have the time that is going to be needed to vote, to studying, and completing the assignments and assessments that are part of a college level course? And if a student does happen to have a GED or high set score, of course, this would not necessarily be obviously for those dual credit students, but for those students with those scores, we also allow those under a multiple measures consideration. Next slide. So the important thing from a K-12 perspective is that we just want to reiterate that the institution of higher education, they are the ones who have the authority to determine which of those multiple measures options, if any, to use for the dual credit course placements during this COVID waiver period. Remember that institutions must justify whatever decisions and policies they have to be sure that they are in alignment with SAC COC, and that is going to be part of their reaffirmation considerations. And so they do have to be sure that whatever policies they use, that they are still in line with SAC's Commission on Colleges policies and guidance. We do recommend that school districts request whatever that COVID waiver policy is by the institution from their IHE partners for that policy to be made available as applicable from their partners. So we recommend that definitely school districts reach out to their higher ed partners to determine exactly what those policies are. Next slide. So the other thing is, of course, this is another definite obligation for the institutions, and of course, working with their K-12 partners, that we have to be assured that whatever those decisions were, whatever those additional measures that were used, that they are appropriately reported to the coordinating board so that we can be sure to capture those placements and what decisions were made for those placements. We also just want to remind everyone that our Division of Data Collection did have a number of outreach efforts with the reporting officials at institutions with regard to how to appropriately report those decisions. We also have our DEPS, which is our annual developmental ed program survey. Every institution of higher ed in the state of Texas has to complete this survey. So that's an additional way that we capture any COVID waiver related data. Next slide. And we also want to remind everyone, this is a very common question that we receive from the field. Will the COVID waivers be extended beyond placements for summer 2021? And our response at this time is that it is under consideration by agency leadership. Once a determination has been made, we will certainly let the field know immediately what that determination is. Next slide. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it on now to my colleague, Mr. Keelan Morgan, and he's going to talk more specifically about the TSIA version 2.0.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm leaning in just a little bit just to make sure my microphone picks up. So yesterday I had a couple of technical difficulties. In advance, if you've been conversing with me through the chat, since I'm taking on the lead presenter role as of now, I'll be kind of peeking over at the chat to see questions. However, I will definitely address them at the end of the presentation. I'll go back through and make sure that we address your questions. So jumping right in, here's the meat of the presentation where I'll share with you some more of the detail about the design of the TSIA2 and some of the more intricate parts. Before we get started, here's kind of like a cheat sheet I always like to include in our presentations. I understand, as you may well do as well. And the educational system, we use a lot of lingo, and sometimes unbeknownst to us, we'll rattle off these acronyms and they don't necessarily have context to our audience. So I wanted to kind of give you a cheat sheet perhaps. So if I reference something, it's there for your review as well. Starting with the TSIA2 development timeline, this has been in the workings for some time now. Going back, and I'll highlight a few pieces. Starting with August of 2019, we selected the College Board as the vendor after a competitive process for the development of the TSIA2. Quarterly, we have assessment task force meetings, and we had our first one in November 19, and I'll explain to you a little bit more about what that particular task force does shortly. Item review, I'll provide you more detail on that. That was a 4-day process where we got some very critical work done, as well as with the standard setting process, which was a 2-day process where that resulted in the college readiness benchmarks. And scroll down Suzanne talked about it earlier. On October 22nd, the board adopted the, at the time, proposed recommended college readiness benchmarks that were published in the Texas Register, which are now the official cut scores or benchmarks for, or college readiness benchmarks for the TSIA2. And last but not least, you have that big red bold date at the bottom, January 11th, 2021. And before I go on, I just want to address how we arrived at that date. As you may be aware, due to the pandemic, we actually had to postpone the implementation of the TSIA2 twice. And due to contractual obligations with our test vendor, among other factors, January 11th was the most formidable date that we could select. While we know that there is no perfect time to implement a or transition from one assessment to the next, particularly an on-demand assessment such as the Texas Success Initiative assessment, we want you to know that we did take a lot of feedback into consideration when selecting this date. And beyond that, working with feedback from higher ed and K-12, and we've recently heard from a group of superintendents as to why this date was selected, but we just want to let you know that it wasn't selected arbitrarily, and we ask that you work with us in the implementation of the TSIA2. If you have any specific questions or concerns about how to specifically make that transition, both myself and Suzanne are available to provide you any help and guidance that you may need. Suzanne, did you have anything to add regarding the launch date before I move on? I'll take that as a no. All right. So here's some highlights. So I talked a little bit earlier about the Quarterly Assessment Task Force. It was a panel. It's a panel of national assessment, content, and psychometric experts that provide advice and guidance related to all facets of the development of the TSIA2. I've listed some of those there so you can get a sense of what their scope of work is. Any decision that we as an agency, the College Board as the test vendor, recommend is actually vetted through this group of individuals in terms of all of these different components, and more importantly, understanding the impact of any decisions that we make, how it impacts students that are required to take this assessment. The next process I'll highlight is the item review. So a common question that we always get is, well, how do you get the items for the TSIA2? So as part of the contract with the College Board, they're required to produce a scope of questions, and that scope of questions is then put through a gauntlet of quality control, where we assembled a group of faculty content experts in both mathematics and English language arts and reading, so to assess that reading and writing piece in consideration of item properties included but not limited to the difficulty of the item, discrimination, bias, and also as important, alignment to the revised standards, which I'll talk about a little later. Standard setting. Standard setting was a 2-day process where faculty content experts, in some cases, they were the same individuals that participated in item review. But again, in both of these scenarios, we were very intentional. We were very intentional to recruit a very diverse group of individuals, and that's from the standpoint of representation across the K-12 space. We had individuals that represented the K-12 space. We had individuals in higher ed from both 2-year and 4-year institutions. We had individuals that represented adult education. And again, across the board, a very diverse group of experts with various statewide representation. So we had the major metropolitan areas, we had rural areas, and it was done with the intent that bringing these groups together, that they could represent the perspectives of the students from across the state. And now I'll share with you some TSIA2 enhancements. Some of you may have heard these before, but later in the presentation, I'll share with you in more detail regarding some of these. And done. So alignment to the revised standards. As I shared, each question was put through the gauntlet in terms of, is it aligned to the standards? So we have realigned the TSIA2 to the most recent standards of the Texas College and Career Readiness Standards, the revised TEKS for English 3 and Algebra 2, the Adult Education Literacy 2.0 standards, and the National Reporting System's Educational Functional Level Descriptors. We've integrated reading and writing. So with the TSIA2, there's no longer a standalone reading and writing section. It's integrated into a new section entitled English Language Arts and Reading. This is moving to assist to help us be in more alignment with already what's happening in K-12, which, as you're aware, with the STAR, that the assessment that assesses reading and writing must be integrated into one assessment. So we move to alignment there, as well as what happened with the SAT as they move to evidence-based reading and writing. We've reduced the diagnostic test to 1. If you're familiar with the current TSIA, the current version, pending the student's score on the CRC or that first set of 20 questions, will route the student into one of 2 diagnostics, either the developmental education diagnostic or the adult basic education diagnostic. However, in the current version of the assessment, only students that are routed to the adult basic education diagnostic are actually assigned a diagnostic level score of level 1 through 6. However, those that test into the diagnostic, to the developmental education diagnostic, it's assumed that they have at least an ABE level of 5-6. So we reduced the diagnostic test to 1. So now any student on the TSIA2 that does not meet the college readiness benchmark on those first set of questions, the college readiness classification test, or CRC, as we refer to it, will receive a diagnostic level score between 1 and 6. And more importantly, we've normed the diagnostic test on the same ability scale as the CRC. And I'll explain a little bit in detail what that means a little later in the presentation. We've included with the TSIA2 a second chance college readiness opportunity for math. So now, as you may be aware, with the writing section of the current version, if a student does not meet the college readiness benchmark on the CRC or those first set of questions and are routed to the diagnostic, if they receive a certain score on the diagnostic in conjunction with their score on the essay, that student still has the opportunity to reach the college readiness classification, although they didn't do so on that initial CRC or that first set of questions. However, for both the ELAR section and the mathematics section, and for math it's new, we're including a second chance college readiness opportunity. So students can be classified as college ready in math based on their diagnostic test performance, and I'll share with you those score profiles shortly. The transportability of test results for students. Scores can be sent directly to institutions at time of testing now. So with the TSIA2, once a student sits down to take the test, the student will have the ability to indicate up to 3 institutions they would like to share their scores with. And even if a student does not send the scores to all of the institutions that they would like to right then and there, let's just say they only send it to 1. Through the student portal, the student would then be able to go back in and also access their scores and send it to institutions unlimitedly at no cost to the student. I definitely want to highlight that it's at no cost to the student when they send their scores to institutions. A common question that we get from the K-12 space with this particular feature is, well, can they send it to us because you're saying institution? Yes, the students will have the opportunity to send their scores to any test site that offers the TSIA. So if that happens to be your high school, they can send the scores to you. However, I just want to let you know that the feature of this, you would receive the score send as an email, and that individual that has access to that email box that is receiving those scores would have to go in and unlock the score report. However, if you're just wanting to pull the scores of your students at your testing site, you can still do so through custom reporting within the TSIA platform. We're improving data matching. So you'll see if you currently have access to the TSIA platform and you create vouchers or you've helped a student register, you'll know that there's included a supplemental ID field in the platform now. What we're doing is we're standardizing the use of ID numbers in the platform to help better match data for TEA across the board. And when I say across the board, if you're not aware, if the student takes the TSIA in the K-12 space, it exists in one database, those score sets. If they take it on the higher ed side, it exists in another database. So what we're going to do, we're going to be sending out very detailed communication very soon to all of the test administrators to let you know exactly what IDs go where and to give you an idea of how that will look. For K-12, the primary ID you will use is the 10-digit TSDS number that's associated with the student record. And for that supplemental ID field, you will use your local ID, whichever that you may choose. And this is the benefit to using both numbers. If a student has access to both numbers, when they go into the student portal to pull their scores, they can enter either of those numbers and get to their score report. And again, we're working on protocol to structure the use of IDs, and we'll be pushing out that communication very shortly. This is something we're very proud of with the delivery of the TSIA2, and it's access to the TSIA2 learning resources, which is the TSIA2 Learning Resources. It's a free online library of instructional and practice materials directly related to the TSIA2 content. A common question we field is, what material do you recommend students engage in to prepare for the TSIA? Or where can a student go to get materials? Where can we go as educators to get materials to help students in preparation for the assessment? And TSIA2 Learning Resources is it. It's available to both students and educators. And you'll notice there I have training to be announced. We will be hosting a training in December where we'll share with you the features of this particular system and provide guidance on use. So for students will be able to engage in two ways. The students can engage either in preparation for the TSIA. They can go in to the library and access all of the resources that are available. And educators can do so as well. For educators, you can actually create a logon and develop customized sets of materials for your students, and you can email them out to students to complete. However, I want to be clear, this is not a learning management system. So once you email out those materials for students to complete, they would watch the instructional videos, they can print out the worksheets and complete them, but they wouldn't be able to submit work back to you through this particular system. And the second way that a student can engage with this particular resource is with the use of their learning locator code, which I'll talk about shortly. We recommend the TSIA2 learning resources for use with the high school college prep course. So additional material that helps students engage. And then for those, if you do any type of bridge programs with your local institutions of higher education, you might also use these resources in tandem with the locally developed curriculum that's already in place. And where I was talking about the second way that a student can engage with the TSIA2 learning resources is with their learning locator code. So I talked a little earlier about the diagnostic test. So if a student does not meet the college readiness benchmark on the college readiness classification test, they will be routed to a diagnostic test. Once they complete the diagnostic test, the student will receive a learning locator code. That learning locator code will now provide them with custom access to the TSIA2 learning resources. So it will kind of carve out, I'll use the words, it'll carve out a custom set of materials in the library that a student can engage in to help address the skill gaps specifically identified by their performance on the diagnostic test. So once a student clicks on the link that's provided on their score report, or they can take that code and enter it at a designated website, the student would then have an access to a customized set of materials that they can engage in to address, again, specific skill gaps as identified by their performance on the diagnostic test. And we want to take time to highlight the TSIA2 accommodations, particularly those that are automatically provided with the TSIA currently and the TSIA2. The test is untimed. We have the save and continue later feature, and it will be available for both the ELAR and the mathematics sections. However, as it currently is, it will not be available for the essay. A student must complete the essay in one sitting. On-screen calculators. We do know that, or I'll just remind you that physical or handheld calculators are not permitted for use with the TSIA or TSIA2. So the on-screen pop-up calculators in the math sections are available for the students, and they'll have the option of a 4-function calculator, a square root, or a graphing calculator, which is currently the TI-84 version available to them in the on-screen pop-up. And I'm gonna go back real quick and talk a little bit more about the student portal. In the student portal, students will now have access to tutorials specifically for the calculator and the highlighter features. We actually had our test vendor or the College Board break those out and put them into the student portal. So now students can engage with the on-screen calculator as well as the highlighter feature prior to sitting down to take the test. This is extremely important because a common question that we field regarding accommodations is, well, the student has an accommodation in K-12 where they're permitted to use a handheld or physical calculator for state assessments. However, given that with the TSIA2, its computer adaptive nature, each math question has been predetermined to which type of calculator, if any, would be available to that student for that question. So we can't allow the use of a handheld calculator for the entire duration of the assessment because certain questions are designed, the content or the metric that's being measured is specifically in consideration of a calculator not being used. So again, students will have access to the calculator and highlighter features available to them in the student portal via tutorials to help them develop that comfort level, which is normally the reason for an accommodation in which they get to use a calculator that they're very familiar with. So K-12 TSI and TSIA2 test administrators, we encourage you must work with your partnering IHEs to determine appropriate accommodations. If you have any questions regarding accommodations, your first line of defense, reach out to your partnering IHE, your institution of higher education that you partner with for, in most cases, dual credit. They'll work with you to confer with their Office of Disability Services to develop the appropriate accommodations for that student for the TSIA. And this is the reason. The TSIA, although broadly used in K-12 for students qualifying for dual credit, to participate in dual credit coursework, and now for the purposes of House Bill 3 for that additional bonus funding, I just completely lost my train of thought. Oh, I got it. My apologies. All right. With the widened use of the TSIA, it's still a college readiness assessment. So we want to make sure that the accommodations being provided to the student are in line with what would be given to them in a higher education setting, and it may not necessarily align with what's provided with them in the K-12 space. And we're working on finalizing some guidance that we can get out to particularly our K-12 stakeholders, the test administrators, to further go through some scenarios with recommended accommodations. And if all else fails, as I said earlier, if you have any questions, you're more than welcome to reach out to myself or Suzanne, and we'll definitely be more than happy to assist you. This actually came up in an earlier question, and I'll ask Kathy to prepare to unmute and chime in on the question that I'll pose to her at this particular slide as well. So the available companion versions for the TSIA2, they will be the standard and large print test booklets. We'll have the Braille version, and then the companion right placer. And Kathy, the specific question that came up is, I know, and I can share that the standard or large print test booklets will be available for print on demand, but when will the orders be available for the Braille version?
Thank you, Keelan. We are almost to full production with those, so we will let everyone know as soon as they are available for ordering, but we're targeting mid-December that folks could begin ordering the special formats.
And if you have not already done so, I highly encourage you. We have 2 weeks of the College Board's TSIA2 training left. We have one in December and one that we will announce for January just prior to launch. And I encourage you to go through those trainings because they talk about the companion versions and how particularly with the print on demand versions for the standard and large print, and I believe even the Braille, the scoring system will look a little different than what it does currently for these versions. So you want to make sure that you receive the proper training if you're going to administer these versions so they can be scored appropriately. And note, the use of the companion versions of the TSIA2, we recommend them as a last resort. The versions do not offer the features of the computer adaptive version, and they require more questions to assess student ability. So we anticipate it's approximately 1/3 more questions than the computer adaptive version. So when we're talking about the CRC or the first set of 20 questions for, let's just say, math, on the accommodated versions or the companion versions, it's about 1/3 more questions. So definitely, if you have any questions regarding should I administer the companion version, or is there a consideration I can give to where the student can still take advantage of the computer adaptive tests, and we provide an accommodation to assist, definitely, again, feel free to reach out to us and we can walk you through guiding you to providing you with best practices for addressing accommodations. Scores for both the TSIA and TSIA2 are valid for 5 years from date of testing. And another common question that we've received is, will you continue to support the statewide PAA through querying or the pre-assessment activity? And the answer is yes. However, if you are an institution that's providing your own pre-assessment activity, you will need to update it to reflect the changes in the TSIA2. And if you need assistance with or guidance in what you may want to update to address the TSIA2, definitely reach out to me directly and I can provide you with some support. Here's a little bit about the unit costs. So the unit costs, they remain the same. They're $1.75 per unit. However, you'll see with the TSIA2 that the number of units to deliver the math CRC or the college readiness classification test and the math diagnostic, it's 1.14 units. The overall price reduction from the TSIA, the current version, to the TSIA2, we were able to cut the cost if you're administering the entire suite of tests to a student by $3.01. And note, the cost that you see here, that's what the institutions pay to the College Board to actually purchase the units, so to speak. However, it's not the cost that the institution may charge the student. On the higher ed side, we have institutions that charge upwards of $20 per section. And I know we do have some institutions in our K-12 space that charge students to take the TSIA as well. However, in consideration of any administrative fees associated with the TSIA2, we ask that you consider the financial impact to students when setting those fees. And last but not least, regarding this slide, if you have current units on hand, they will carry over and can be used for the TSIA2. Here's an overview of support documentation we'll be making available to you. We have the test specification documents. When you receive the PowerPoint, when you click on here, it's actually a hyperlink and it'll take you out to the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board's webpage, where we have these documents on our Texas Success Initiative and Developmental Education Update website. And you'll notice the student brochure and interpreting your scores. Those will be in the technical manual. Those will be launched in January 2021 with the tests. And the blueprint document, I know I received a number of requests from our K-12 stakeholders regarding this document, and it cannot be produced until the test launches. So we're anticipating the delivery of that document in April 2021. And once we receive it, we will definitely make it available on our website and notify you of its availability and push it out to the field. And the TSIA2 validity study, I went through a number of changes to the assessment from the current version to the TSIA2. The validity study for the TSIA2, the work will begin in January of 2022, and we anticipate it to be completed and the report to be delivered to us in the summer of 2022. That will be 1 year after launch. So 1 year after launch, the work will begin. We'll have an adequate sample, and if any adjustments need to be made, they will be made once that validity report is received and those results have been analyzed, and we'll make any necessary adjustments based off that report. I did see a question regarding the trainings, and I mentioned it to you as well, that we have 2 more weeks of the College Board's required trainings. If you are an institutional administrator on the TSI platform for your campus, you need to go through these trainings. So actually, let me correct that. At least 1 institutional administrator for the district account needs to complete all 4 trainings. So 1 person needs to go through all 4 trainings. We're completing the process where we're creating a slide deck that's a train the trainer. So once that person has went through all of the trainings, they would then be able to train all of the necessary people in the district, on the campus, to ensure that you're adhering to all of the required protocols for administering the TSIA2. And there was a question regarding part 4 of this training. We said it's going to be available November 2020. We've yet to finalize that training. As long as you've done the first 3 as of now, you are in good standing. So if you've done the first 3, you are in good standing. We will notify you as soon as session 4 is available and provide you with the necessary resources that you need to complete that particular module. Say, did you have anything to add before I move on, Suzanne? And you can unmute yourself now.
Yes, thank you. No, this is very good. It looks like we did have a question about the online calculator. So just rest assured, we're going to share that with the test vendor and see if we can possibly get some movement on the graphing calculator.
And now I'll transition to a little bit more detail regarding the TSIA2 in terms of the actual test specifications. And note, these, although we don't anticipate any major changes with the tests, until it launches, everything that we share is in draft format. So if the final test specifications that will be published, if they differ a little bit from what you see in this or another presentation that we've shared with the field, that's the rationale, that we're still in the final stages of development, but we don't anticipate any final major changes, but things may be tweaked in the final version. So giving you a high-level overview of what this TSIA2 test experience will be like. Like the TSIA, the next version, the TSIA2 is computer adaptive, meaning each student will start off with, let's just say, a medium difficulty, or really it's more specific, not even as an example, but a student will start off with a medium difficulty question based on their response to that question, i.e. whether or not it's answered correct or incorrect. That'll determine what the next question looks like. The pre-assessment activity is still required before testing. The test sessions begin with the college readiness classification test. So essentially that first set of questions that will determine yes or no whether or not the student is college ready. If the student does not meet the college readiness benchmark on the college readiness classification test, the student will be required to take the diagnostic test for that particular subject area. And in most cases, a student will receive their individual score report immediately after testing. So giving you a little context to now, really, what does it look like? With the mathematics section, so the mathematics, I shared earlier, each component of the test, mathematics and English language arts and reading, both have a college readiness classification test as well as a diagnostic test. For mathematics, the college readiness classification test contains 20 items. So that first set of 20 items, college ready, yes or no. And then the diagnostic test contains 48 items. For English language arts and reading, the college readiness classification test contains 30 items. And the ELAR suite does include the essay, which is a persuasive essay, 350 to 600 words that in most cases will be scored by the automated system. And again, as with the mathematics section, the ELAR section, the diagnostic test also contains 48 items. Here we get into breaking down the test a little bit more, specifically for math. The test strands, or the content areas, we use those words interchangeably, as 4 content strands: quantitative reasoning, algebraic reasoning, geometric and spatial reasoning, and probabilistic and statistical reasoning. And for each of those, you can see the breakdown in items for the college readiness classification test, as well as the diagnostic test. So again, with how the test is structured, we really sought to balance the tests along the continuum of a broader array of content areas, because one of the most heavy criticisms that we receive from our partners with the current version is it's very heavily focused on algebra. So we want to be very transparent in terms of what content areas are being assessed, and then with the design of the test, how many items are associated with each of those content areas. And you'll see for the diagnostic area, that 48 items is split evenly across the strands. And here, I'm not going to read them to you, but for each of the strands, there are also sub-content areas. And those sub-content areas that you see on the screen, on the slides and those to follow, are those that are represented in both the college readiness classification test and the diagnostic test. So when we talked about the norming of the diagnostic test to the CRC, this is part of that where the content that's being assessed on the college readiness classification test is also being assessed in the diagnostic test. However, with the diagnostic test, given that it's designed to assess a broader array of ability, we do have additional concepts that are represented in the diagnostic tests that are assessed that are not assessed in the college readiness classification test. And those can be found in the test specification documents, which we'll make sure you have the link and access to as well. And here are the sub-content areas for geometric and spatial reasoning, as well as probabilistic and statistical reasoning. I'll give you a couple of seconds to look over those. And then on to the English language arts and reading test strands. And you'll see it's bucketed. There are reading focused strands and then there are writing focused strands. For the reading focused strands, it's literary text analysis and informational text and analysis and synthesis. And for the writing focused strands, it's essay revision and editing and sentence revision, editing, and completion. And again, for the college readiness classification test for the ELAR section, 15 address the reading focus areas and 15 address the writing focus areas. And respectively, it's split down the middle for the diagnostic test with 24 items for each broader content area and further broken down to 12 for each area. And here are the sub-content areas for ELAR for the first 2 test strands. I'll give you a few seconds with those. And then those for writing focus. And I've also included the rubric in which the right placer or the essay is graded upon. However, there were no changes to the essay component from the current version to the TSIA2. And here's the fun part. Everybody has always wanted to know, what are these scores? We shared earlier in the presentation that on October 22nd at the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board meeting, that the board actually adopted the, at the time, proposed college readiness benchmarks. And I'll share those with you. But understanding the scores, whereas the current version of the TSIA starts with the in the 300 range, the TSIA2, to make sure that there's no confusion about what set of scores are being presented, is starting in the 900 range. So the first number is a 9 with the TSIA2. And the range for the college readiness classification test is 910 to 990. And again, the college readiness classification test is that first indicator. Is the student college ready? Yes or no. The diagnostic test range is level 1 through 6. And again, I want to highlight there that any student that does not meet the college readiness benchmark and is routed to the diagnostic test will now receive a level 1 through 6 diagnostic level score. For the essay, it remains unchanged. The essay will be graded on a range of 1 through 8. In highlighting a couple of things regarding specifically the diagnostic tests. The diagnostic tests provide feedback on specific areas of strength and weakness. The diagnostic test should be used when placing students into DE coursework and interventions for high school complete students, or if you're considering a student for a college prep opportunity, the diagnostic results can be used in determining that placement as well. The TSIA2 diagnostic tests are normed on the same ability scale as the college readiness classification tests. A little bit more about that now. So what we really mean by that is the diagnostic tests, again, I shared with you that within the test strands that there's content that's being assessed in both the college readiness classification test and the diagnostic tests. However, through the standard setting process, all of the questions were considered in terms of, okay, what's that level that a student needs to achieve to be college ready? What types of questions? So given that they're normed on the same ability scale, we're not anticipating students to score, let's just say for the TSIA2, you make a 930 on the mathematics section of the CRC. it's with the way that the test is now normed, it's unlikely, we don't anticipate a student would then go into the diagnostic test and do gangbusters and make a diagnostic level score of 6. So given that that they scored at the lower range on the CRC, and when they transition into the diagnostic, we anticipate those scores to still be in the same range. However, on the current version, one of the things that we filled a lot of questions with the way that the test was designed, that I shared with you, there are 2 diagnostics. So if a student scores at the lower range of the CRC, the student goes into the adult basic education diagnostic, which then the student can still still has the potential to test really high in the diagnostic. And again, with the correlation of the way that the scores are normed for the diagnostic test and the CRC on the TSIA2, we do not anticipate a high number of cases where that is the case. And I say we do not anticipate, I'm not saying it in absolute. I'm already standing by email when the TSIA2 launches, because somebody will email me a perfectly redacted score report saying, see, Mr. Morgan, just the opposite of what you said. Students are scoring. However, with the psychometrics that have been assessed with the TSI, the development that we went through with the development of the TSIA2, we don't anticipate a high number of those cases. And based on statistical modeling, the expected percentages at or above the college readiness classification scores are aligned with current student performance. That means we don't anticipate with the launch of the TSIA2 that there will be a significant more number of students that do not meet the college readiness benchmark or meet the college readiness benchmark. We anticipate those percentages to remain about the same. The diagnostic profile, a little bit more. So again, if a student doesn't meet the college readiness benchmark on the CRC, they go into the diagnostic profile. And I'll share with you in a little bit that when a student goes into the diagnostic, they still have the opportunity to come back to that college readiness classification through a second chance opportunity. However, once the diagnostic is completed, the student gets a diagnostic profile, and it has 3 components. The first, they'll receive an overall diagnostic level score of 1 through 6, and they'll also receive a proficiency level in statement for each strand. That proficiency level will be categorized as basic, proficient, or advanced. And that's different than how we currently categorize the proficiency levels on the current version. On the current version of the TSIA, it is needs improvement. Why did I just draw a blank? Needs improvement, proficient.
Limited proficient.
Limited, yeah, needs improvement, limited proficiency, and proficient. Thank you so much for that save, Kathy. I've been eating, breathing, and sleeping the TSIA2 so much. I was like, hey, I'm missing my connection with the current version. So again, the current version, the proficiency levels are needs improvement, limited proficiency, and proficient. On the TSIA2, the proficiency levels will be basic, proficient, and advanced. And note that on the TSIA2, within those proficiency levels, each proficiency level still contains a range. You won't see an additional number beyond receiving that basic, proficient, and advanced, but understand that there's still a range in there. And we note that because the same combination of proficiency levels may not result in the same diagnostic level score. And I'll share with you why that's important shortly. And last but not least, the third component is the learning locator code. And as I shared earlier, the learning locator code provides the student with customized access to the TSIA2 Learning Resources Library based on their performance on the diagnostic tests. And here are the college readiness benchmarks for the TSIA2. For ELAR, or English Language Arts and Reading, if the CRC is greater than or equal to 945 and an essay score greater than or equal to 5, the student is considered college ready. if the college readiness classification test score is less than 945 and the student has a diagnostic level greater than or equal to 5 and an essay score greater than or equal to 5, the student is college ready. For mathematics, the college readiness classification score of greater than or equal to 950, pretty straightforward. And here's the second chance opportunity for math that I spoke of earlier. If the student scores below a 950 on the CRC and they receive a diagnostic level of 6, the student is considered college ready. And again, both TSIA and TSIA2 scores are valid 5 years from date of testing. Here's a little bit on how students move through the assessment. So I'll start with ELAR. It's a little bit more cumbersome than the math section. So with ELAR, I broke it down into 2 pathways. So the first is students with a CRC score greater than 945, CRC score greater than 945, less than 945, my apologies. I'm looking at it and I'm like, okay, why is the big mouth pointing at the 945? So the CRC score is less than 945. So they start with the ELAR classification test. If the student scores 910 to 944 on the ELAR classification test, the student is routed to the ELAR diagnostic. And then pending their score on the diagnostic, 1 or 2 things happens. If the student scores diagnostic level 1 through 3, you'll see they go straight over to the right and the student will receive their diagnostic profile and learning locator code. And in this particular scenario, the student would not receive the essay. So the essay is not administered. The second scenario is if a student scores 910 through 944, again, based on their performance on the diagnostic test, if the student scores diagnostic level 4 through 6, the student goes up and they're routed to the essay. The student is provided with the essay. Based on their performance on the essay, there'll be 1 of 2 outcomes. The first, if the student scored diagnostic level 5, 6, and had an essay score of 5 through 8, the student is considered college ready. And this is the second chance opportunity for the student to demonstrate college readiness. And if the student scored diagnostic level 4 and a right placer score of 1 through 8, the student will receive their diagnostic profile, excuse me, the diagnostic profile and their learning locator code. The student would not have the opportunity to demonstrate college readiness that route. However, if for students that fall into that diagnostic level 4 and right placer 1 through 8, in some cases, nope, I'm not gonna even say that because that's not even the case. No, I'll put my foot in my mouth. Disregard that. And Suzanne, make a mental note for me to come back to you with that particular question.
Got it.
Uh-oh, got ahead of myself. For the math section, here we go. This is the slide I skipped, and that's what threw me off. For students, and I apologize, I was like, I know it's a condition missing. For students starting in ELAR with a CRC that's greater than or equal to 945, it's pretty straightforward. So if the student starts with the ELAR, 945 to 990, the student is routed directly into the essay. Pending their performance on the essay, 1 or 2 outcomes. If the student scores 5 through 8 on the essay, the student is considered college ready. If the student gets a score of 1 through 4 on the essay, the student is then routed into the diagnostic test. So, and this is where I was going with the scenario, because we've actually had this posed to us a couple of times so far. If a student in this scenario, they score 945 through 990, they go into the right place or essay, and let's just say the student scores 1 through 4, but the student makes a level 5 through 8 on the diagnostic. that student would be eligible to retest on the essay only. And this is the scenario where it would be appropriate to just administer the right placer essay to a student. That's what I was trying to get to in the next slide, but it was the incorrect one. And moving on to math, the branching profile for students that start, if you make a 950 to 990, the student is considered college ready. If the student does not meet that 950 benchmark, the student is routed into the diagnostic. And based on the performance of the diagnostic, one of two things. If the student has diagnostic level 1 through 5, the student will receive their diagnostic profile and learning locator code. And here's that second chance opportunity. If the student tests at diagnostic level 6 on the math diagnostic test, that student is college ready. And now I'll yield to Suzanne, and she'll share some guidance that we're sharing with our higher ed partners that we presented to them on yesterday with how to use the TSIA2 scores for placement.
Yes, thank you, Keelan. So for higher education, their considerations also include the requirements of enrolling certain students in co-requisite models. And just as a quick reminder, a co-requisite model is for a student who has not yet demonstrated college readiness. That student actually can enroll in the college level course directly, the gateway entry level college level course, but will also be required to co-enroll in some sort of additional support intervention or course so that which is directly aligned to the learning outcomes of the college level course, so that the student has increased their likelihood that they will be successful in that college level course. So in a nutshell, that's a co-requisite. And higher ed statute requires that certain students be automatically enrolled in these co-requisite models, and that's what we call the mandatory co-requisite. And so we tell our institutions with regard to ELAR that if they have the essay of 1 through 4 and the diagnostic test 5, 6, those are students who are required to be enrolled in a co-requisite. And we also tell them, however, if they are near college ready, and here's an example in essay 4 and the diagnostic level 4, we recommend that they consider the co-requisite, but again, that is an institutional decision. For students who are below 5, 6, again, I'm sorry, below 945, again, the diagnostic result of 5, 6 does require a mandatory co-requisite. And as statute currently and rules are currently written, it does not consider an essay score at this time. And then the recommended co-requisite, again, for those students scoring below the 945, a diagnostic range of 4 to 6 and an essay of 3 to 4 is considered for the institution to recommend consideration for a co-requisite. Next slide. With regard to math, again, students who assess below the 950, the diagnostic result of 5 requires a mandatory co-requisite enrollment. And we ask institutions to consider a diagnostic result of 4 to possibly consider recommending a co-requisite if that student is in a non-algebra path according to his or her meta major or degree plan. Next slide. We also wanted to let everyone know that we will be convening work groups for ELAR and math, faculty content experts, and they will start in early spring is our goal there. And they will make additional recommendations for specific placements in fall 2021 and later for students who don't meet the college readiness benchmark or whose TSI status is unknown. So we will be seeking that additional guidance and recommendations for future policy or maybe perhaps modifications to our existing rules, especially with the ELAR and the essay component. Next slide. So just additional initiatives. We are still working with institutions of higher ed, our college readiness and success model grants, our CRSM grantees. We had 13 awards over $1 million, and those funds support those early adopters, those institutions that agreed to move to 100% co-requisite enrollments for certain students that we described earlier, starting in spring. So they're actually a little bit ahead of the curve, getting those enrollments in co-requisites starting this spring, whereas the rest of the field will be moving to those co-requisites in fall. Additional use of funds is to support multiple measures, and the use of multiple measures, as we've talked about earlier with regard to the COVID waivers, and then also using non-course options as the DE support, the developmental ed support component of that co-requisite model. Professional development priorities this year include enhancing and scaling co-requisites as all institutions move to 100% of those level 5-6 students, and in ELAR and level 5 in math. And then of course, advising is always a top priority for us, since we really believe that equitable access to robust and high quality advising plays such a key role in students' success and their likelihood for completion in post-secondary. And of course, we're also going to be going through and completing our evaluation project for the implementation of the co-requisite models as required in House Bill 2223. Next slide. So Keelan, you want to talk about our Gov delivery listserv?
Sure. If you do not already subscribe to receive the latest and greatest and updates as it relates to the Texas Success Initiative, the assessment or developmental education, you can use this QR code. And then when you receive the PowerPoint, it's actually hyperlinked to our webpage where you can subscribe to receive firsthand information. Particularly, we send out updates regarding our webinars, our trainings, and things as such, as well as any pertinent communication as it relates to, like I said, updates and changes to TSI, TSIA, or developmental education for the state. That's the primary listserv that we use. So you're welcome to subscribe to it. And last but not least, we have our contact information here to feel free to reach out to us. I joke all the time. I spent 14 years at on a higher ed campus. And in my last role, I actually had a significant oversight of a TSI program. And every time I called this number, 427-6262, it always amazed me that Suzanne answers her phone herself. So we're readily available to assist you. There's no question too big or too small. If you have a department meeting and you have some contextualized questions for us, we've virtually joined groups via meetings. Whatever you need, we are here to help. And Suzanne, if you have any closing thoughts and ideas, I'll go through and see if there's any questions that have not been addressed.
Unmute. Thank you very much, Keelan. That was a lot of information in a very short period of time. So I want to remind everyone that a recording of this webinar will be available at the THECB, the Texas Higher Education YouTube page. If you just Google YouTube THECB and then put in TSI webinar, then a number of options will appear and you'll be able to figure out which one is the one that you're looking for. That recording will be available starting Monday, November 23rd. Okay, so again, for you, if you want to look at, repeat some of this, maybe go through specific parts, and then, I don't know, maybe take some pictures sometimes of some of the slides and share them with your colleagues, or share the information with your colleagues. Again, A recording will be available starting Monday, November 23rd at our YouTube page.
Question. Will students who took the pre-assessment activity for the current TSIA but need to retake a section on the TSIA2 need to take the new pre-assessment activity?
So that is pretty much a local institutional decision. Many institutions do not require repeating the pre-assessment activity for students who are retesting, especially within a certain time period, maybe within a 6-month time period or so forth. That's an institutional decision, and that certainly makes sense. However, in this case, we would highly recommend that students, if they're retesting they took the original on the TSIA, but they're retesting portions on the TSIA2, it certainly would be beneficial for the students to learn a little bit about the different features, especially with regard to the student portal that's available with the TSIA 2.0, and especially with those calculator and the highlighter tutorials that the student certainly would want to be aware of. Of course, also the learning resources, the learning resource library, the free online library. Students who will be retesting on certain sections of the TSIA 2.0, that's not available for the current version, so they would also it would also greatly benefit the students to learn about that free online resource as they make preparations for retesting.
Is there, and Kathy, if you can chime in on this one, I know the answer, I know the basic answer to the question, but if you can provide a little bit of feedback to this question as to how they might accomplish what they're trying to accomplish, say I'd be thankful. Is there a feel for graduation year? We are planning on mass TSI testing for 4 grade levels, but I struggle to pull an easy list of former testers based on grade level.
Yes, the easiest way to do that, and you certainly can reach out to me and I'll help you with that afterwards, is to set up a local background question, and I can show you how to do that.
All right. If we have students, Suzanne, if we have students on a waiver enrolled currently in college courses and they are currently not passing, do we need to have the students take the TSIA before the end of the semester if the college partner is not willing to test them now?
Okay, I'm sorry, can you repeat the first part of that question again?
If we have students, so they've been placed in a college level class based on the COVID waiver, and they're not currently passing, do we need to have the students take the TSIA before the end of the semester if the college partner is not willing to test them now?
So I'm assuming that the K-12 partner is not a test administrator themselves.
No, I believe they are, and they're saying essentially with the exception rule that for placement that the student has to test by the end of the semester, but there seems to be a difference in opinion as to whether or not the students should be tested. The college partner does not want to test them where they're enrolled at, so is it beholden on the high school to do so?
I would say yes, because it's in the best interest of the student. And then I would also go ahead and email me, because I think there's also an obligation on the part of the institution of higher ed to be involved in this, because the rule does actually apply directly to them. I don't want to put an undue burden on the school district. So yeah, I would probably recommend if you can email me directly, my information is right there, and maybe we can set up a follow-up call so that I just can get better clarity on what the circumstance is, and we can probably reach out to the higher ed institution and see what we can work out there.
Will we be able to use the multiple measures options to qualify students for dual credit for the fall 2021?
So the answer currently, Commissioner Keller has approved the use of the COVID waivers for TSIA through summer 2021. Any extension beyond placements for this summer are under consideration. So our commissioner and our leadership, they are currently considering possibilities or what additional options may be available beyond this summer, but we do not have any sort of determination at this time.
And yes, the only mandatory trainings are for those at the institutional administrator access level. If you are a site manager, if you are a proctor, and or any of the other roles that are associated with the platform, you're more than welcome to sign up for and engage in the trainings that are currently happening. However, in order for your institution or your site, your district to get credit that you've met the training requirement, an institutional administrator must, at least one institutional administrator must complete all 4 of the trainings. And again, as a reminder, there are only currently 3 trainings available. Once the 4th training on the TSIA2 learning resources is available, we will notify everyone and provide you with the necessary resources that you need to complete and receive credit for that training. Okay, and I think I addressed this, but if we have students qualified in TSI reading but not writing, do they have to take the TSIA2 ELAR or just portions? What about if they are qualified in TSI reading and writing but are missing a qualifying essay score?
It's a great question. So in that case, the student can retest on the essay only. But remember, they need to make sure, and so they've got the qualifying score for both the reading and the writing. Yes, so they can retest on the essay only. And I just want to emphasize, just for those who still may be a little bit confused, a student with only an essay score would not qualify for a valid test for TSIA or TSIA2. Even for the current version or for the new version, the essay must always be accompanied with a CRC score, and in some cases also a diagnostic score. So just FYI, I've just added in Kathy's email address in the chat. So those of you who had specific questions about possibly setting up specific test questions, like the question earlier, Kathy can, she can be able to help you directly, and if you want to reach out to her.
And I think we have just a couple more questions and then we'll be good to go. And the first, I want to allow Kathy to share what's the protocol for becoming a TSIA testing site?
Thank you, Keelan. Yes, the easiest way is to, thank you, Suzanne, for putting my email in there, because if you'll just send me an email, I have a set of instructions that I can very quickly send back to the institution.
And just to remind everyone, becoming a TSIA test or TSIA2 test administrator is free of charge. Basically the way it works is that you request as a school district or as an institution vouchers for tests, and those are billable directly through the College Board.
All right, and the last question. Well, a couple of things I'll address. When will the website for the student portal be available? The student portal is already available, and it's available at the web address accuplacer.org. And in the bottom right-hand corner, there's a little radio button. It's pretty clear. It says student portal, and you can click on there. And also included in the student portal are the access to the TSIA and the current version of the TSIA and the TSIA2, the practice tests. So if you're interested in getting a feel of what the test contains, you can go into the student portal, you can set up a quick account and engage with the TSIA2 practice tests. And we're still waiting on our official launch date for the TSIA2 Learning Resources site. So we're anticipating, it's our goal to have a soft launch, and that'll be to where educators and students can go in and access all of the resources. However, we do know that customized access for students to access it with their learning locator code, that particular feature will not be available until the test launches, as a student would have to complete the diagnostic test before receiving a learning locator code. So as soon as more information regarding the TSI2 Learning Resources Library, once that's available, we'll definitely push that out via our listserv. So definitely, if you are not subscribed, and I know the leeriness in terms of I do not want to subscribe to a listserv. We do not send out an abundance of emails. I would probably say I can count on two hands the number of emails we send out specifically regarding developmental education in a year, just in terms of, so that's probably, let's just say about one a month, if you have any reluctance. But I strongly encourage you to subscribe to the listserv just so you can get that information up to date. And that actually concludes all of the formal information that we had to present. A copy of this webinar will be posted on the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board's YouTube page. If you just Google THECB YouTube page, it'll take you right to it. And in your confirmation for this webinar, that link is made available to you in there as well. And Kathy, real quick, can you chime in? When is the next TSIA2 trainings for the College Board? When are those set for? Do we have the December dates?
We do, December 7th, 8th, and 9th. And then January, it'll be the 25th, 26th, and 27th.
And I have my contact information up there. If you want the link to those trainings, just shoot me an email and I will respond to you within 24 to 48 hours with that link to where you can register and engage in those trainings. And Kathy, could you clarify your email just one more time?
Sure, it's K and then my big long last name. So are you ready? So it's KMONTOGNESE@collegeboard.org.
And one real quick repeat of the dates in December and January, Kathy.
Yes.
And then Suzanne, you can close us out.
Okay, December 7th, 8th, and 9th for part 1, 2, and 3, and then January 25th, 26th, and 27th. And then I should add that about mid-December, we will have the recordings. So in case those dates do not work for you, we will have recordings available and you would be able to attend that way as well.
And Kathy, if I could just clarify real quick, anyone who is interested on the administration of the assessment level to attend, that they should contact their TSIA test administrator, and the information is in the testing portal with regard to registration. Is that correct?
Yes, the link is right on the homepage, where you can go and click right there to register. And just to reiterate, if you're under a district that is like a multi-high school district, you do need somebody from each high school to attend. So we just want to make sure that that's clear to everyone.
Thank you very much. So thank you everyone for hanging in there. Those few folks who hung in all the way to the end there. We hope we've been able to answer all of your questions. If not, or as you're sharing this resource, this webinar with your colleagues, additional questions come up, absolutely, please email us. We do have that open door policy in terms of questions. And as Keelan mentioned earlier, especially with the emails, we do answer those emails as quickly as possible. And we think that one of the most important roles that we play at the Higher Ed Coordinating Board is to be a resource for you, because we understand you all do the hard work, and you are the boots on the ground, if you will. And so any types of information or resources that we can share with you to make your job easier, then that makes us happy. That's what we're here for. So thank you again, everyone, for joining, and stay safe. And if the weather is cold in your area, stay warm.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.